Welcome in, everybody, to our deep dive into Yangdrung Bon.
Yangdrung Bon.
We've got a whole stack of academic studies on Bon here.
Great.
And, it's really interesting because one of the things that we wanted to do with this deep dive is kind of explore this idea that it's often misconstrued as just a sect of Buddhism.
Exactly.
So are you ready to kind of have your mind blown a little bit about what Bon really is?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's a tradition very much in its own right that predates the arrival of Buddhism in Tibet and has its own intricate practices and a whole fascinating origin story.
Yeah, and one of the things that I found really interesting is that just right off the bat there are these really key differences between Bon and Buddhism.
For sure.
And what are some that really stand out to you?
Well, even seemingly small differences like the Bonpo spinning prayer wheels counterclockwise or circumambulating temples in the opposite direction from Buddhists really point to a distinct philosophy, right? I imagine the symbolism there, almost like a reversal of direction, a different way of engaging with that spiritual energy.
No, it's so interesting. And one of the things that the sources mention is that they have a unique mantra, Om Matre Mue Seldu.
Yes.
And it's just fascinating to me that there's these little sonic markers of their separate identity. And then there's also the Yangdrung, which is their version of the swastika. And it's so interesting to me how both traditions kind of have these similar symbols with slightly different interpretations.
Yeah, exactly. The Yangdrung turns counterclockwise and it represents permanence and indestructibility.
Yeah, which is a similar concept to the Dorje in Buddhism, but again with that distinct Bon flavor. So it's a great visual reminder of how these two traditions can exist in close proximity yet retain their unique identities.
And so we've been talking about these these kind of key differences, but I think one of the things that's really important to establish early on is that Bon is not just a Buddhist offshoot. It's got its own founder.
Absolutely.
Tanpa Shenrab Miwo.
Yes.
And a whole mythology and a whole
cosmology, yeah.
Cosmology, yeah. And speaking of mythology,
yes.
I want to talk about Olmo Lungring.
Yes.
Because this is described in the sources as this mythical land where Bon originated, kind of like the Shangri-La of Bon.
Yes. And much like Shangri-La, there's this really interesting debate about whether Olmo Lungring was an actual place or a purely symbolic realm.
Yeah.
Some scholars actually try to link it to Mount Kailas in western Tibet, an area known as Zumzheng.
So there's this really tantalizing possibility that it may have existed in the real world.
Right.
But regardless of its physical location, the descriptions are so rich.
Yeah.
And they really emphasize its spiritual significance.
Sure.
The sources mention that there's a 9-storied swastika-shaped mountain at the center. Can you imagine that?
It's a powerful image, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's just one piece of this larger symbolic landscape.
I mean, there are palaces, 7 royal races. There's even this arrowway tunnel leading into this hidden land. So it's clear that Olmo Lungring, whether real or metaphorical, holds a really central place in Bon cosmology. And in a way, it kind of helps to explain the origins of the tradition itself.
And speaking of origins, I think it's time to talk about Tanpa Shenrab Miwosh himself.
Okay.
He's he's considered the founder of Bon. He's the
key figure.
Kind of the Buddha of the Bon tradition. So what can you tell us about this guy?
Well, his life story is as captivating as any epic, tale.
Really?
According to Bon tradition, Tanpa Shenrab actually traveled from Olmo Lungring to spread the teachings, battling demons and ultimately achieving enlightenment. So it's really this classic hero's journey narrative, and you see that resonating with similar stories found across different cultures and spiritual traditions.
It's so fascinating how these universal themes really play out in different contexts. That's almost as if the human psyche needs these narratives
these stories
to make sense of the world and our place within it.
Absolutely. And just as the Buddha's journey inspires millions, Tanpa Shenrab's path offers similar inspiration and guidance for Bonpos.
So I think we've established that Bon is its own distinct tradition, rich history, captivating origin story, but what about its teachings?
Right.
How do they actually guide followers on their spiritual journey?
Well, Bon, much like Buddhism, has this really structured system called the 9 ways, or vehicles.
Okay.
Think of them as different paths suited for various levels of spiritual understanding and commitment.
So there's a path for everyone.
Exactly, regardless of where they are on their journey.
I love that.
Now, what's really interesting is that the first 4 ways are known as the causal ways, and they really focus on this worldly benefits and are deeply rooted in shamanic practices.
This is where things get really practical.
It's where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah. And so, like, how does this actually translate into
everyday life? Because the sources mention some really intriguing examples.
Yeah, absolutely. Take sortilege, for instance.
Okay.
It's a form of divination using tools like barley arrows and incense to kind of seek guidance.
So interesting.
I mean, it reminds me of things like tarot card readings or using runes, different cultures, using unique tools to kind of connect with something bigger than themselves.
It's like there's this element of like seeking wisdom from this unseen world, tapping into this hidden knowledge that I think transcends culture.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then you have things like Bon astrological calculations, which involve using tools like a brocade cloth and calculating boards. They even invoke specific deities for accurate predictions. So it sounds a lot like astrology, but again, with that distinct Bon flavor.
And I thought it was really interesting. The sources mentioned ritual practices.
Yes.
Like the Arai rite, which is used for restoring balance to disordered elements, and the stinging rite to overcome negative influences. Like these sound pretty intense. Yeah, they're reflecting those deep shamanic roots again,
Wow.
These are dealing with spiritual forces that are believed to impact our lives very directly. It's almost like spiritual tools to clear out negativity and restore harmony.
That's a great way to put it. It's like a spiritual deep clean.
Exactly.
What else stood out to you?
Well, one of the things that I found fascinating is how Bon physicians diagnose ailments.
Yeah.
They examine the energy channels in the body, analyze urine, and even observe the patient's physical appearance to determine the root cause of an illness.
It's such a holistic approach. It really acknowledges the interconnectedness.
It does.
Between our physical and spiritual well-being.
Absolutely.
And it kind of makes you wonder, how much our modern medical systems might be missing by not taking that connection into account.
I think that's a great point. It challenges us to think about different ways of understanding health and healing.
Now, to kind of give our listeners a real taste of the human side of Bon, I want to talk about this story of Taparitsa, a Bonpo master.
Yes.
And his encounter with a student named Nengzher Lopo.
Yeah.
Because I think this story really highlights the importance of humility in the face of spiritual knowledge.
It's a classic tale that really uses narrative to convey a very profound truth.
Yeah, and the sources depict Taparitsa disguised as this young boy carrying wood. And he's engaging in this debate with Nengzher Lopo, who is actually known for his pride and intellectual prowess.
And his arrogance.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then, of course, comes the twist. Taparitsa suddenly ascends into the sky, appearing within a rainbow.
Imagine witnessing that.
I know. Can you imagine?
It must have been quite a humbling experience for Nengzher Lopo.
It must have been such a powerful image that really underscores this idea that true wisdom isn't about intellectual arrogance.
Exactly.
It's about cultivating inner awareness.
Yes.
And recognizing that there's always more to learn.
Always more to learn.
It's a lesson that's so relevant for all of us, no matter our background or beliefs.
Absolutely. It reminds us that the pursuit of spiritual knowledge is a lifelong journey, not a destination.
And sometimes it takes a dramatic display of power.
For sure.
To remind us to stay humble on that journey.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that vastness of the spiritual landscape and approaching it with a sense of awe and reverence.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. We've seen how Bon stands apart from Buddhism with its unique origin story, its fascinating founder, Tonpa Shenrab, and the structured path it offers through the 9 ways.
And we've only just begun to explore the practical side of Bon with its shamanic roots and its emphasis on this worldly benefits.
But to really understand the resilience and adaptability of this tradition, we need to look at the challenges it faced.
Yes.
In a predominantly Buddhist Tibet, and that's where we'll pick up in part 2 of our deep dive, so stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Yangzheng Bon.
Back into Bon.
In the last part, we talked about Bon's distinct identity, and it's really kind of fascinating history. But now I think it's time to delve into maybe the more mystical side.
Okay.
Its cosmology and its whole pantheon of deities.
I'm ready to dive into that cosmic ocean.
All right.
The sources mention this concept of the three worlds.
Yes.
And I'm curious to kind of learn more about that because it sounds like it's sort of like the blueprint for how Bonpos understand the universe.
It is, yeah. So imagine the universe divided into three realms. The world of the gods, the world of humans, and the world of the subterranean.
Mm-hmm.
And each realm has its own inhabitants and its own kind of principles, but they're not isolated.
Right.
Energy and influences flow between. They're creating this really dynamic interconnectedness.
So it's not just about these like separate realms. It's about their interaction and the energy exchange.
Exactly. It's like a cosmic ecosystem.
I love that.
And within these three worlds exists this incredibly diverse array of deities, each playing a very specific role and function, really reflecting the complexity of Bonpo's worldview.
That's where I get excited. Tell me about these deities.
Okay.
Who are the major players in this cosmic drama?
All right, so at the top you have Kuntu Zangpo, the primordial Buddha,
Okay.
often depicted as this white figure radiating light, symbolizing the source of all creation.
Wow.
So think of him as the ultimate ground of being from which everything arises.
So he's like the big bang of...
You could say that.
On cosmology.
Then there's Shenla Okar, the god of compassion,
Okay.
who plays a crucial role in guiding humanity towards enlightenment. He's this benevolent figure kind of watching over us, embodying that compassionate heart of Bon.
And of course you can't forget Tonpa Shenrab.
Of course not.
The founder of
A
Bon.
man himself.
Who is also considered a Buddha. And
A key figure in the pantheon.
a key figure in the pantheon.
Yeah, it's important to remember that while we're talking about gods and goddesses, Bon also includes this whole host of local deities, nature spirits, and even some potentially troublesome entities like demons.
Wait, demons?
Yeah.
Are we talking like scary horned creatures lurking in the shadows?
Not necessarily. I mean, in Bon, a demon often represents more like an imbalance or negativity, those forces that disrupt harmony. So it's not so much about literal beings as it is about understanding those forces that create suffering.
This is more about symbolic representations of those internal struggles and negative energies that we all face.
Exactly. And Bon actually offers practices and rituals to address those imbalances, to restore harmony, both within ourselves and in the world around us.
So the sources mention this distinction between like supramundane and worldly deities.
Right.
What's the difference there?
So the supramundane deities are those who reside in the higher realms beyond the cycle of birth and death. They've achieved a state of enlightenment, and they represent this ultimate source of wisdom and compassion.
So they're like the cosmic mentors.
Yes, the enlightened beings who guide the way.
Okay.
And then you have the worldly deities who are still bound to the cycle of existence, but they play important roles in maintaining balance and order in the human and natural realms. So they might be associated with specific mountains, rivers, or elements of nature. Some are even considered guardian spirits, protecting specific places or people.
It's so fascinating how Bon acknowledges these like different levels of existence and the interplay between them.
It highlights the idea that we're all part of this larger cosmic web connected to forces both seen and unseen.
Right.
Now let's talk about a specific category of deities that really kind of caught my eye, the protector deities.
Okay.
These are the fierce guardians of the Bon teachings, tasked with defending against negative forces.
The spiritual warrior.
Exactly. Ready to battle anything that threatens the integrity of Bon.
I love it.
They're often depicted in these wrathful forms with fearsome expressions, powerful weapons, symbolizing their ability to overcome negativity and obstacles on the spiritual path. One of the most revered is Sidpai Galmo, the queen of existence.
The queen in existence.
Often shown riding a white mule and carrying this scorpion-tailed whip.
Wow. That's a powerful image. She sounds like a force to be reckoned with.
She is. But it's important to remember that their wrath isn't about anger or vengeance. It's about protecting the teachings and guiding people towards enlightenment. It's a fierce form of love and compassion.
So the protector deities are like the immune system of Bon.
A great analogy.
Defending against harmful influences.
Ensuring the integrity of the teachings and safeguarding the path for practitioners.
So we've talked about cosmology, we've talked about deities,
Right.
but how do Bonpos actually interact with these divine forces?
Well, that's where the rituals come in.
The rituals.
Right, rituals are a way to communicate with the deities to invoke their presence and blessings.
It's like Bon uses rituals as a bridge between the human and the divine realm.
Exactly. It offers this structure for connecting with the divine and seeking guidance, protection, or assistance in overcoming obstacles.
So what does like a typical Bon ritual look like?
Well, many begin with purification practices to create a sacred space and prepare the practitioner for the encounter with the deities. This could involve physical cleansing, meditation, or chanting.
It's like creating a clear channel.
Right. For communication.
Then come offerings of food, incense, or other symbolic items as a gesture of respect and gratitude.
It's like bringing a gift to show your appreciation and sincerity.
Exactly. The heart of the ritual often involves chanting mantras, visualizing the deities, and performing specific gestures or mudras to invoke their presence and connect with their energy.
It's like tuning into a specific frequency.
Precisely.
To connect with the deity.
Through this process, Bonpos seek to establish a connection with the divine, to receive blessings and guidance, or to request assistance in fulfilling specific aspirations. So it's really a collaborative effort, recognizing that we're not alone on our spiritual journey, but can rely on the wisdom and compassion of the deities to guide and support us.
This idea of like collaboration with the divine is so powerful.
It is.
It's this partnership that recognizes that interconnectedness between humans and the spiritual realm. Absolutely. And it's this understanding of interconnectedness, this profound interplay between the three worlds and the role of the deities that really shapes Bon's view of reality.
It's a perspective that challenges us to think beyond our limited human understanding and acknowledge our place within this larger cosmic order.
Absolutely. But how do these ancient practices and beliefs relate to our modern lives? That's a question we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive.
Stay with us. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the world of Yungdrung Bon. We've journeyed through these ancient myths, explored a complex cosmology, and encountered this whole pantheon of deities. But now I think it's time to kind of bring it all home. How do these ancient Bon traditions speak to us in the 21st century? Like, what wisdom can we glean from a tradition that's thrived for millennia?
That's a great question. And I think, one of Bon's most potent messages is this emphasis on harmony with nature, within ourselves, and with the cosmos as a whole. It's a principle that I think resonates really deeply in a world that's grappling with environmental challenges, social divisions, and just this kind of pervasive sense of spiritual disconnect.
Yeah, it's like Bon is offering this blueprint for restoring balance, for remembering our interconnectedness with all of life. And speaking of interconnectedness, I'm really struck by how Bon blends the spiritual and the practical.
Right.
It's not just about these otherworldly concepts. It's about how we live our lives here and now.
Absolutely. And that's where I think those shamanic roots we've talked about really shine those practices. We discussed the ransom rites, divination healing rituals. They're not just relics of the past. They're tools for addressing real-world challenges and promoting well-being.
Yeah, it's about taking those ancient tools and applying them in a modern context. It reminds me of how people are rediscovering herbal remedies and traditional healing practices. Like, there's this growing awareness that ancient wisdom can offer valuable insights for contemporary issues.
For sure. And I think another key takeaway is Bon's adaptability. It's a tradition that's evolved and integrated new ideas while remaining true to its core principles. It demonstrates this balance of rootedness and flexibility, something I think we can all learn from in a world that's constantly changing.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some key insights that you think our listeners can take away and maybe even apply to their own lives?
Well, I think the idea of interconnectedness is so central to Bon. It reminds us that we're not isolated individuals, but part of this vast web of life connected to all beings and to the cosmos itself. And I think this awareness can foster greater compassion, understanding, and responsibility in our actions.
Yeah, it's a shift in perspective that can ripple out and create positive change in the world.
Absolutely. And then there's the emphasis on harmony and balance.
Yeah.
Bon encourages us to cultivate harmony in our relationship with nature, within ourselves, and in our interactions with others. And this isn't just about feeling good. It's about recognizing that our well-being is intertwined with the well-being of the planet and all living creatures.
It's a holistic approach to life that acknowledges the interconnectedness of everything.
Precisely. And Bon reminds us that we have the power to restore balance, not just through external solutions, but through inner transformation, cultivating wisdom, compassion, and a deep connection with the sacredness of life.
It's about recognizing that spirituality isn't a separate compartment of our lives. It's woven into the fabric of our everyday experiences. It informs how we relate to ourselves, to others, and to the world around us.
Exactly. And Bon, with its rich tapestry of practices and teachings, offers a path for those seeking to deepen their connection with the sacred and to live a more meaningful and fulfilling life.
This deep dive has truly been an eye-opening experience, and I hope our listeners have gained a newfound appreciation for the depth and relevance of Drung Bon.
It's been a pleasure exploring this fascinating tradition with you.
Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey into the heart of Bon. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.